Michael Reeves thought he had it all. A thriving photography business, a beautiful fiancée, Sarah, and his best friend, Marcus, as his business partner. Just 2 weeks before the wedding, his life shattered when he discovered Sarah and Marcus together in his own bed. Betrayal to Brilliance: How a Wedding Photographer's Cheating Fiancé Fueled His Artistic Resurrection. Part 1, The Shattered Frame. The champagne flutes were already engraved. Michael and Sarah, Forever Begins June 17th. Michael Reeves held one up to the light streaming through his studio window, watching the etching catch the afternoon sun. 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, he'd be standing at the altar, camera-ready smile plastered across his face, finally marrying the woman he'd loved for 5 years. His phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, his business partner and best friend since college. Running late for the Henderson shoot. Can you cover the first hour? Michael sighed. This was becoming a pattern. Marcus had been increasingly unreliable over the past few months, leaving Michael to shoulder most of their photography business. But that would change after the wedding. Sarah had convinced him they needed to have a serious talk with Marcus about accountability. Sarah. Just thinking her name made him smile. She'd be at their apartment now, probably drowning in wedding planning chaos. He decided to surprise her, maybe bring those pastries she loved from the bakery on 5th. The drive home took 20 minutes through downtown Portland's early evening traffic. Their apartment building stood in the Pearl District, a renovated warehouse they'd fallen in love with 3 years ago. Michael juggled the pastry box and his camera bag. He never went anywhere without it as he rode the elevator to the 4th floor. The apartment door was unlocked. That was odd. Sarah was meticulous about security. Sarah, honey, I brought croissants, Michael called out, nudging the door open with his shoulder. Silence. Then a sound that made his blood freeze. A low moan, distinctly feminine, coming from the bedroom. His bedroom. The camera bag slipped from his shoulder, hitting the hardwood floor with a dull thud. His legs moved on autopilot, carrying him down the hallway he'd walked 1,000 times before. The bedroom door stood slightly ajar. Through the gap, he could see tangled sheets, bare skin, movement. Michael's hand touched the door. It swung open silently. He'd fixed that squeaky hinge just last month. The tableau before him would be seared into his memory forever, more permanent than any photograph he'd ever taken. Sarah, her dark hair spread across their pillows, and Marcus, his business partner, his supposed best friend, intertwined with the woman who wore Michael's grandmother's engagement ring. Time stopped, or maybe it accelerated. Michael couldn't tell anymore. Sarah saw him first. Her eyes went wide, her mouth forming a perfect O of shock. She scrambled backward, grabbing for the sheets. Marcus turned, and for a split second, Michael saw something in his face that wasn't surprise. It was resignation, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. "Michael," Sarah's voice cracked. He didn't stay to hear the rest. He turned and walked out, his vision tunneling, the walls of their apartment seeming to close in. He heard them calling after him, heard the scramble of movement, but his body had already made the decision his mind couldn't process. He needed to leave, now. Michael found himself in his car with no memory of getting there. His hands shook so intensely he could barely grip the steering wheel. He drove. Anywhere. Nowhere. The city lights blurred past, streaks of color against gathering darkness. His phone rang incessantly. Sarah, Marcus, Sarah again. He finally pulled over in an empty parking lot near the waterfront and threw the phone onto the passenger seat, watching it light up with incoming calls until the battery died. The pastry box sat on the floor, crushed. A small, stupid detail that broke something inside him. He'd bought her favorite croissants. He'd been thinking about surprising her, making her smile. Michael pressed his forehead against the steering wheel and finally, blessedly, felt nothing at all. Part 2. The Unraveling. The next week passed in a fog. Michael moved through the motions of dismantling his life with mechanical precision. He called the venue. They kept the deposit, $10,000 gone. The caterer, the florist, the DJ, all those calls, where he had to say the same words over and over. The wedding is canceled. Some asked why. He developed a script. It's not going to work out. Let them imagine a peaceful parting, a mutual decision. The truth was too ugly, too raw to speak aloud. Sarah came by the apartment when he was packing. He'd told her to be gone by the time he returned from his parents' house, where he'd spent 3 days sleeping in his childhood bedroom, staring at posters of Ansel Adams and Henri Cartier-Bresson. "Michael, please," she said, standing in the doorway as he threw clothes into a suitcase. "Let me explain." "Explain?" He laughed, a harsh sound that didn't feel like it came from his body. "You're going to explain how you fucked my best friend in our bed?" She flinched. It didn't mean anything. "How long?" "What?" "How long?" He turned to face her, and she stepped back. Good. He wanted her afraid. He wanted her to feel even a fraction of what he felt. 6 months, she whispered. 6 months. Half a year of lies. Half a year of coming home to her, kissing her, making plans for their future, while she'd been with Marcus. Michael felt something crack in his chest, a fault line spreading through the architecture of his identity. "Get out," he said quietly. "The apartment is in my name. Get out." After she left, Michael sat on the floor of their emptied bedroom and finally cried. Great, heaving sobs that felt like they'd tear him apart from the inside. When he was done, he felt hollowed out, a shell of himself. The studio was harder. Reeves Klein Photography had been their dream, built from scratch over 5 years. They'd won awards, shot high-profile weddings, built a reputation as Portland's most sought-after photography duo, and now Marcus wanted to buy him out. "I think it's best," Marcus said during their meeting at the lawyer's office. He couldn't meet Michael's eyes. "For everyone involved." "Best for you, you mean?" Michael's voice was flat. "You get the business, the clients, the equipment we bought together. What do I get?" "A fair price." "There's nothing fair about this, Marcus." Michael leaned forward. "Did you plan this? Did you circle my girl while we built this business together? Was that your strategy?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "I didn't plan to fall in love with her." "Love," Michael laughed bitterly. "You don't know what that word means." In the end, Michael signed the papers. He took a settlement that was far less than his stake was worth, but he couldn't stand the thought of prolonged legal battles, of being tied to Marcus for months or years. He wanted to be free of both of them, to excise this tumor from his life completely. The money from the settlement, combined with his savings, gave him about $80,000. Enough to start over, if he was careful. But start what? Where? He had no idea who he was without photography, without Sarah, without the life he'd built. His phone rang, a new one, since Sarah and Marcus wouldn't stop calling the old number. It was his mother. "Sweetheart, I'm worried about you." "I'm fine, Mom." "You're not fine. You've lost everything in 2 weeks. Talk to me." "What do you want me to say?" Michael stood at his apartment window, looking out at Portland's skyline. "That I'm broken? That I can't sleep? That every time I close my eyes I see them together?" "I want you to let yourself grieve," his mother said softly. "And I want you to remember that you're more than what happened to you. You're a brilliant photographer, Michael. You have a gift." "Had a gift. I sold my half of the studio." "The studio isn't your gift. Your eye is. Your talent. That's something no one can take from you." After they hung up, Michael stood there for a long time. His mother was right about one thing. He couldn't stay in Portland. Every street corner held memories. The coffee shop where he'd proposed. The park where they'd had their first date. The studio where he'd thought he was building a future. He opened his laptop and started searching. Small towns. Coastal. Somewhere he could breathe. Somewhere no one knew Michael Reeves or his spectacular failure. He found it at 2 a.m. Fenton Bay, population 3,000, on the Oregon coast. A tiny fishing village with harsh winters and dramatic cliffs. Perfect. Part 3. The Edge of the World. Fenton Bay in October was exactly as hostile as Michael had hoped. Rain lashed the coastline in sheets, wind howled through the narrow streets, and the locals regarded him with the particular suspicion reserved for city transplants. He'd rented a small cottage on the outskirts of town, a weathered structure that smelled like salt and wood rot. The landlord, a grizzled man named Tom, had looked at Michael's expensive SUV and designer jeans and quoted a price that was probably double the going rate. Michael paid it. He didn't care anymore. The first week, he didn't take a single photograph. He walked the cliffs in the rain, letting the cold soak through his inadequate jacket, almost hoping he'd slip on the wet rocks. He drank too much cheap whiskey. He slept 14 hours a day and woke up feeling more exhausted than when he'd gone to bed. It was during one of these walks, on a particularly harsh morning, when the wind threatened to push him off the cliff edge, that he saw it. A bald eagle, massive and majestic, perched on a dead tree that jutted from the rocks like an accusation. The bird's yellow eyes fixed on him, unblinking, assessing. Michael stared back. Something passed between them. Recognition, maybe? Two creatures at the edge of the world, surviving because they didn't know how to do anything else. The next day, he unpacked his camera. The equipment had sat in boxes since he'd arrived. His Canon 5D, his collection of lenses, his tripod, tools of a trade he'd thought he'd left behind. But holding the camera again felt like greeting an old friend. His hands remembered the weight, the balance. He went back to the cliff. The eagle was there, as if waiting. Michael shot an entire memory card, capturing the bird against the storm-dark sky, the ocean churning behind it. He shot until his fingers went numb, and rain had soaked through every layer of clothing. Back at the cottage, huddled next to a space heater, he uploaded the photos to his laptop, and stopped breathing. They were good. Better than good. There was a rawness to them, an emotional intensity he'd never captured in his carefully composed wedding portraits and engagement photos. The eagle looked fierce and vulnerable at once, embodying something Michael felt but couldn't articulate. Survival. Beauty in harshity. He posted one to his Instagram, an account he'd neglected since the breakup, still showing his old life. Studio shots, behind-the-scenes wedding photos, captions about love and happiness that now felt like lies. The new photo stood in stark contrast. He captioned it simply, "Survivor." Then he went back out to shoot. Part 4. Resurrection. The photography became obsession. Michael prowled the coastline at all hours, learning its moods, its secrets.
I love making these videos for you. If you liked this story, then please like, subscribe to my channel, and switch on the notifications for more entertaining stories. Please also leave a comment for any story suggestions.
He shot sea lions bellowing on rocky outcrops, their sleek bodies both comical and magnificent. He captured the way light broke through storm clouds in cathedral shafts, illuminating patches of ocean like divine favor. He photographed tide pools at golden hour, the trapped water reflecting the burning sky. Each image carried the weight of what he'd lost, the betrayal that had driven him here. But somewhere in the process, the pain began to transform. It didn't disappear. He wasn't naive enough to think heartbreak worked that way. But it became something he could use, channel into his art. The locals slowly warmed to him. Tom the landlord started inviting him for coffee. Marina, who ran the general store, told him about the best spots to see gray whales during migration season. A retired fisherman named Carl became his unofficial guide, pointing out hidden beaches and warning him about dangerous tides. "You running from something?" Carl asked one day as they sat on a bluff, watching sea otters play in a kelp forest below. "That obvious? City boy moves to the ass end of nowhere in October? Yeah, pretty obvious." Carl lit a cigarette, cupping his hands against the wind. "Don't worry, we all are. Running from something or toward something, sometimes both." Michael kept posting his work online. His follower count began to climb, slowly at first, then faster. People responded to the emotional honesty in his images, the way they captured both beauty and pain. He started getting comments from other photographers, questions about his technique, his equipment. One message stood out. It came through Instagram DM. Michael, your coastal work is stunning. The composition, the emotional resonance, it's exactly what we look for. Would you be interested in discussing a potential assignment? Janet Morrison, Senior Editor, National Geographic. Michael stared at his phone, certain he was hallucinating. National Geographic, the publication he'd dreamed about shooting for since he was a teenager, paging through copies in his local library. He drafted and deleted a dozen responses before settling on something simple. Yes, absolutely. When would you like to talk? The call came 2 days later. Janet was brisk and professional, explaining they were putting together a feature on coastal ecosystems and climate change. They'd been following his work. One of their assistant editors had stumbled across his Instagram and shared it with the team. We're particularly drawn to how you capture the emotional weight of these environments, Janet said. There's a narrative quality to your work. It's not just beautiful. It's telling us something about survival, adaptation, resilience. Michael's throat tightened. She'd identified exactly what he'd been pouring into these images. I'd be honored to be considered. The assignment would be 6 months, possibly longer, extensive travel along the Pacific coast. The pay is competitive and all expenses covered. Are you available? Available? Michael almost laughed. He'd never been more available in his life. Yes. Excellent. I'll send over the contract details. Michael, I have to say, your wedding photography was technically proficient, but this new work? This is the photographer you were meant to be. After they hung up, Michael walked down to the beach. The tide was out, exposing sand rippled like a fingerprint, pools catching the late afternoon light. He thought about Janet's words, the photographer you were meant to be. For the first time since that terrible afternoon in his Portland apartment, Michael felt something like hope. Part 5. The Fall. While Michael's career rose from the ashes, his old life was imploding spectacularly. He heard about it first through an email from a former client, a bride he'd photographed 3 years ago. She'd kept in touch, occasionally liking his new Instagram posts. Michael, I don't know if you've heard, but I thought you should know. Reeves Klein is in serious trouble. Multiple former clients are suing them for copyright infringement and stolen techniques. Apparently, they've been using your signature style, the one you developed, and claiming it as their own innovation. The wedding photography community is up in arms. Just wanted you to know in case you need to protect yourself legally. Michael sat back, his coffee going cold in his hand. He opened his laptop and started searching. It didn't take long to find. The wedding photography forums he used to frequent were ablaze with drama. Marcus and Sarah had rebranded the studio after Michael left, claiming a new artistic direction. But photographers who'd worked with Michael before recognized his techniques immediately. His signature use of natural light, his approach to candid moments, the specific way he framed couples against environmental elements. Worse, they'd apparently been selling educational workshops, teaching their methods to aspiring photographers for thousands of dollars per seat. Methods Michael had developed over years of experimentation and practice. Former clients began speaking out. Several reported that Marcus and Sarah had promised them the Reeves style when booking, explicitly referencing Michael's previous work. When questioned about his absence, they'd told different stories. He'd retired, he'd moved into commercial photography, he'd decided to pursue other interests. Never the truth. Then the lawyers got involved. One of the clients they'd shot after Michael left was a corporate attorney who'd paid premium prices specifically for Michael Reeves style photography. When she discovered Michael was no longer with the company and that Marcus and Sarah had misrepresented themselves, she filed a lawsuit for fraud and breach of contract. Others followed. The wedding photography community, tight-knit and fiercely protective of artistic integrity, turned on Marcus and Sarah with remarkable speed. Vendors who'd sent them referrals stopped. Their Instagram comments filled with questions they couldn't answer. Bookings dried up. Michael received a call from his old lawyer. Michael, I know you wanted to be done with all this, but you need to know, Marcus and Sarah are in serious financial trouble. The lawsuits are piling up, and there's talk of criminal fraud charges. Additionally, several clients are saying you should be entitled to royalties since they paid for your techniques. I don't want their money, Michael said. It's not about wanting it. It's about protecting yourself and your work. You developed those techniques. You have a right to them. What do you need from me? Documentation. Proof that you developed these methods before the split. Original files, time-stamped photos, any teaching materials or notes you created. I want to build a case for intellectual property theft. I don't want their money, Michael said. It's not about wanting it. It's about protecting yourself and your work. You developed those techniques. You have a right to them. What do you need from me? Documentation. Proof that you developed these methods before the split. Original files, time-stamped photos, any teaching materials or notes you created. I want to build a case for intellectual property theft. Michael spent a week going through his archives, pulling together evidence. It was painful, looking at his old work, remembering the person he'd been. Those wedding photos were technically perfect, but emotionally hollow compared to what he was creating now. He'd been shooting what he thought he should shoot, not what he needed to. Still, the evidence was damning. He had years of time-stamped files showing the evolution of his techniques. Teaching notes he'd written but never shared. Even old emails where Marcus had asked him to explain his processes. This is gold, his lawyer said. They don't have a leg to stand on. Michael didn't feel victorious. He felt tired. Part 6. The Contract. The National Geographic contract transformed Michael's life again, but this time he was ready for it. The assignment took him from the storm-battered coasts of Alaska to the kelp forests of California, documenting how climate change was reshaping these ecosystems. But it was more than environmental journalism. Through his lens, Michael captured stories of adaptation and resilience. Sea otters learning to survive in warming waters. Coastal communities fighting erosion. Salmon spawning in streams that might not exist in another generation. Each photograph carried layers of meaning. The otter, floating on its back, cracking open a clam, became an image of determination against overwhelming odds. The ancient lighthouse, standing against storm waves, spoke to endurance. The tide pool creatures, surviving in a space between worlds, reflected transformation. His editor understood. "You're not just showing us what's there," Janet said during a review meeting. "You're showing us what it means. That's rare, Michael. Don't lose it." The feature ran in the spring issue, a 20-page spread titled Edges, Life at the Boundaries of Survival. Michael's name appeared in bold print, his biography mentioning his recent transition from wedding photography to natural world documentation. The response was overwhelming. His Instagram followers jumped from 50,000 to 300,000 in a week. He received inquiries from galleries wanting to show his work. Other publications reached out with assignment offers. TED wanted him for a talk on finding authenticity through loss. His mother called, crying, "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. I always knew you had this in you." "I didn't," Michael admitted. "I had to lose everything to find it." Maybe that's the point. Maybe we don't know who we really are until we're stripped down to nothing. Back in Fenton Bay between assignments, Michael had become something of a local celebrity. The town was proud of their resident National Geographic photographer. Marina had framed the magazine cover and hung it in the general store. Tom had finally admitted he'd overcharged Michael on rent and tried to refund the difference. Michael told him to donate it to the local school's art program. Carl, his fisherman friend, was blunter. "Good for you, kid. You came here looking half dead. Now you look alive." But news from Portland kept filtering through. His lawyer kept him updated on the lawsuit situation, not because Michael asked, but because it was becoming increasingly relevant to his own intellectual property rights. Marcus and Sarah's studio had closed. They'd filed for bankruptcy after settling several lawsuits. The fraud charges had been dropped in exchange for financial restitution, but their reputation was destroyed. No one in the wedding photography industry would work with them. Sarah had reached out through a mutual friend, asking if they could talk. Michael had deleted the message. He had nothing to say to her. But Marcus was different. Michael felt something more than anger toward Marcus. There was grief there too. For the friendship he thought they had, for the partnership that had felt genuine. He wondered if any of it had been real, or if Marcus had been coveting what Michael had all along, his talent, his techniques, his girl. The answer came in an unexpected way. Part 7. The Letter. It arrived at Tom's address. Michael's mail still went to the cottage, though he was rarely there anymore. A handwritten envelope with Marcus's return address. Michael stared at it for a long time before opening it. He was sitting on his usual bluff, camera beside him, watching the sunset paint the ocean gold and red. He'd been here for almost a year now. So much had changed. The letter was several pages, Marcus's familiar scrawl filling both sides of each sheet. Michael, I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I need to write this down, even if you burn it the moment you're done. I've spent the last year in therapy, trying to understand why I destroyed everything good in my life. My therapist says I should take responsibility without making excuses, so here it is. I was jealous of you. I was jealous of your talent, your relationship with Sarah, your effortless charm. You made everything look easy, and I resented you for it. The affair started because Sarah came to me complaining about wedding planning stress. She felt like you weren't engaged enough in the details. I was sympathetic, I was available, and I was weak. What started as emotional connection became physical, and before I knew it, we'd been lying to you for months. I told myself we'd end it before the wedding, that it didn't really matter because you'd never know. The cognitive dissonance required to maintain that belief should have told me how far gone I was. When you caught us, part of me was relieved. The secret was killing me, even though I kept choosing to maintain it. Does that make sense? Probably not. After you left, Sarah and I tried to make it work. We told ourselves we'd fallen in love, that we were meant to be together, that somehow the business would be okay. All lies. We couldn't look at each other without feeling ashamed. Every client we shot reminded us of what we'd stolen from you. Not just your techniques, but your trust, your friendship, everything. The lawsuits were deserved. We got caught up in our own desperation, trying to prove we could succeed without you. We couldn't. The studio failed because it was built on your talent, and without you, we had nothing. Sarah and I broke up 3 months ago. Turns out a relationship built on betrayal doesn't have a solid foundation. Who knew? I'm working for a corporate photography company now, shooting product catalogs. It's soul-crushing work, but it's what I deserve. Sarah moved back east to live with her parents. I saw your National Geographic feature. It's the best work you've ever done. I mean that sincerely. There's a depth to those images that your wedding photography never had. You found what you were meant to do, and I'm happy for you, even though I have no right to those feelings. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just needed you to know that I'm sorry. I'm sorry I betrayed you. I'm sorry I took advantage of our friendship. I'm sorry I tried to steal your legacy. I'm sorry for all of it. I hope you found peace in whatever you're doing now. You always deserved better than what I gave you. As a friend, as a partner, as a human being. I'm sorry. Michael read the letter 3 times as the sun sank below the horizon. He felt, not forgiveness exactly, but something close. Acceptance, maybe? Understanding that Marcus's betrayal had said more about Marcus's character than Michael's worth. He thought about responding, then decided against it. Some things didn't need closure. Some wounds heal best when left alone. Instead, he pulled out his phone and scrolled through his Instagram, looking at the journey documented there. The early Portland photos, technically perfect, emotionally vacant. The transition period, grief and rage translated into storm-torn seas and solitary wildlife. And now, images that balanced beauty and pain, hope and survival, transformation and endurance. His follower count had topped 500,000, but more importantly, the comments had changed. People weren't just saying beautiful anymore. They were telling their own stories of loss and recovery, of finding themselves after losing everything, of being broken and rebuilt into something stronger. One comment stood out from that afternoon. Your work saved my life. I was planning to end things after my divorce, but I saw your photographs and realized that beautiful things can come from harsh places. Thank you. Michael stared at that comment for a long time. This is what his work meant now. Not capturing fairy tale moments for people starting their lives together, but documenting the reality that life breaks us, reshapes us, and sometimes, if we're very lucky, makes us into something more authentic than we were before. He pulled out his camera and shot the last light fading from the sky, the stars beginning to emerge in the deepening blue. Tomorrow, he'd fly to Vancouver Island for a new assignment on coastal wolves. Next month, Indonesia to document coral reef recovery. His calendar was full for the next 2 years. The old Michael, the wedding photographer, would have been terrified of so much uncertainty, so much travel, so much change. But this Michael, the one forged in betrayal and rebuilt in solitude, thrived on it. He packed up his equipment as full darkness settled over Fenton Bay. The cottage lights glowed in the distance, a beacon calling him home to this place that had saved him. Epilogue, 3 years later. Michael stood in the Museum of Contemporary Photography in Chicago, surrounded by his work. The exhibition, titled Edges, Photography by Michael Reeves, filled 3 galleries. His coastal wildlife series had the main space, but they'd also included some of his newer work, portraits of people living on edges, refugees, terminal patients, formerly incarcerated individuals rebuilding their lives. Each photograph told a story of survival and transformation. The opening night crowd moved through slowly, respectfully, understanding they were witnessing something raw and true. Janet from National Geographic found him staring at one of his earliest Fenton Bay images, the bald eagle on the dead tree, fierce and vulnerable. "That's where it started," she said. "That's where I started," Michael corrected. Or restarted, I guess. "Have you been back to Portland?" "No, nothing for me there anymore." "No curiosity about what happened to them?" Michael shrugged. "I hear things. Sarah's engaged to someone else. Marcus is still doing commercial work. They're living their lives. I'm living mine." "Any regrets?" He considered the question seriously. 3 years ago, he would have said yes. Regret that he'd trusted them, regret that he'd wasted 5 years, regret that he'd been so blind. But now? "If it hadn't happened, I'd still be shooting weddings in Portland, technically proficient and emotionally dead. I'd have married Sarah and spent decades in a life that looked good from the outside while suffocating me from within. So no, I don't regret it. I survived it." His phone buzzed. A text from Emma, the marine biologist he'd been seeing for 6 months. They'd met on assignment in Belize, bonding over shared obsessions with the natural world. "How's the opening? I'm landing at O'Hare in an hour." Michael smiled and typed back a response. Emma knew his whole story. He'd told her during a late-night conversation in a tent on a barrier island, waves crashing beyond the canvas walls. She'd shared her own tale of betrayal and recovery, of being denied tenure because a male colleague claimed her research as his own, of fighting back and eventually winning. They understood each other's scars. A young photographer approached Michael hesitantly. "Mr. Reeves, I'm sorry to bother you, but I wanted to say, your work changed my life. I was doing corporate headshots, dying inside a little every day. Your National Geographic feature made me realize I could do something different, something true. I quit last month. I'm terrified, but I'm doing it." Michael shook his hand. "The terror is part of it. Lean into it. That's where the good work lives, in the uncomfortable places." After the young photographer left, Michael walked through his exhibition one more time. He paused at a newer image, a tide pool at the exact moment between tides, creatures adapting to the transitional space between ocean and land, between drowning and exposure. The photograph had won awards, been featured in textbooks, inspired countless essays about resilience and adaptation. But for Michael, it meant something simpler. You can survive the space between who you were and who you're becoming. You can live in the transition and find beauty there. His phone rang. His mother. "Sweetheart, I'm looking at the exhibition live stream. It's magnificent. Your father and I are so proud." "Thanks, Mom." "Do you remember what I told you when you just moved to Fenton Bay and you thought your life was over?" Michael did remember. "You're more than what happened to you." "I was wrong," his mother continued. "You're not more than what happened to you. You're everything that happened to you. The joy and the pain, the success and the failure, the love and the betrayal. All of it made you who you are, and who you are is extraordinary." After they hung up, Michael stood there in his gallery, surrounded by the visual evidence of his transformation. She was right. He wasn't the same man who'd walked into his bedroom 3 years ago and had his life shattered. That man was technically skilled but emotionally shallow, building a life that looked good but felt empty. The man he'd become, forged in heartbreak, rebuilt in solitude, tempered by hard work and honest art, was stronger, deeper, more authentic. And yes, Marcus and Sarah had lost everything. Their business had collapsed, their reputation destroyed, their relationship built on betrayal crumbling under its own weight. Part of him had wanted that, in the dark days after it happened, had fantasized about their downfall. But standing here now, Michael felt only indifference. Their consequences were their own. His path had diverged completely from theirs, taking him to places he'd never imagined, not just geographically, but emotionally and artistically. He'd found himself at the edge of the world, at the boundary between his old life and whatever came next, and instead of falling into the abyss, he'd learned to fly. Emma texted, "Cab just pulled up. See you in 20 minutes. Can't wait to see your work in person." Michael smiled and headed for the exit, leaving his photographs behind to tell their stories without him. Outside, Chicago's streets gleamed with recent rain, lights reflecting on wet pavement like scattered stars. He'd photograph that tomorrow, he decided, the beauty in the aftermath of storms. Because that's what he did now. He found light in dark places, hope in devastation, strength in survival. And he did it with a clarity he'd never possessed before. The clarity that comes from being broken completely and choosing to rebuild yourself piece by piece into something true. The old Michael would have been terrified of that truth. The new Michael lived in it every day, his camera capturing the beautiful, harsh, honest edges where one thing ends and another begins. He was home.
I love making these videos for you. If you liked this story, then please like, subscribe to my channel, and switch on the notifications for more entertaining stories. Please also leave a comment for any story suggestions.